I welcome this debate on international protection, but I'm very conscious that it could be taking place in very different circumstances. There, but for the grace of God, the backdrop to these statements could have been multiple fatalities as a result of the arson attack in Drogheda, and I want to be unequivocal in stating that there can be absolutely no tolerance for racism or racist attacks. Nobody should be in fear for their safety or their children's safety, and the message must go out loud and clear that racist attacks on any community or those living in IPAS accommodation will not be tolerated. The attack in Drogheda was clearly a traumatic ordeal for those impacted, especially the small children involved, and I want to commend the emergency services who saved lives, and I want to express the hope that those who carried out these and similar attacks are brought before the courts and held to account for their crimes. I also want to be clear in stating that there is no contradiction in condemning such racist attacks and in raising concerns around government mismanagement of immigration generally or the international protection system specifically. The former is abhorrent and unacceptable. The latter is entirely legitimate. In fact, criticisms of government handling of these matters aren't just acceptable, they're well founded, because the international protection system in this state in particular is dysfunctional. That's not the fault of those applying for asylum. It's the fault of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, who have made a mess of the system which continues to operate in crisis mode. Decisions on international protection applications are taking too long, appeals are taking too long, deportations are not enforced, and all the while there's massive profiteering from the provision of often inappropriate IPAS accommodation. On migration, government make decisions without any consideration of the consequences and then have no plan to deal with those consequences. And one example, the government earlier this year signed up to an extension of the Temporary Protection Directive in respect of Ukrainians. There was no consideration of numbers, costs, capacity or other implications in terms of Ukrainians coming to Ireland. The Minister didn't even bring the matter to the Dáil for debate, let alone approval. And now he scampers, making decisions on the hoof, playing catch-up with his own government's lack of forethought. Equally, the decision by the government to sign up to the EU Migration and Asylum Pact in its entirety is a mistake. It undermines Irish sovereignty and binds us to EU rules which will not take into account our unique circumstances, including the fact that we're part of the common travel area with a state outside of the EU. And in a week that the government is actually citing EU law as an obstacle to implementing the contributions to accommodation costs for those IP applicants in asylum, and where you're trying to blame EU law for housing delays, it's bizarre that you have yet to realise that tying us into an EU framework that will not only tie your hands, Minister, but the hands of future ministers is the wrong approach. There's been a lot of focus on the international protection system, and rightly so in my view. It's a broken system. I've been clear and unapologetic in stating that it has failed local communities, raised divisions and tensions. It hasn't worked for those communities who have lost local amenities, such as hotels, and who have been given no additional supports, no additional investment, no additional health services, educational services or Gardaí. The approach of locating IPAS centres in areas based on the single criteria of where a building, owned by someone who is willing to provide it for that purpose, is located is the wrong one. It has stripped many communities, working class communities in particular, of any sense of agency, of being part of the decisions that shape their own areas. And it's long past time to end the planning exemption for IPAS and Ukrainian accommodation and to ensure a proper system of community engagement so that communities are part of the decisions that affect them. But we also need to be clear that this dysfunctional system is not working for those who are fleeing war or persecution either. Housing people in communities that are already under pressure doesn't serve them well. Placing them in accommodation which is often substandard, often without fire certs and without access to the services that they need, doesn't serve them well. And forcing people to wait years for applications to be processed doesn't serve them well either. And alongside the pressures it clearly puts on the system, it feeds into that overall sense that the system is broken. It's still taking far too long for decisions to be made. For those who appeal, the mean processing time is over 2.5 years. That's failure and inefficiency writ large. Even for the so-called accelerated procedure, the overall processing times, including appeals, is 15 months. That's not good enough. And while there's been an increase in staff in the international protection system, there's still a vacancy rate of over 10%. And what all that means is that those awaiting decisions are left in limbo for far longer than they should be. It also means that some who will ultimately adjudicated not to have an entitlement to be in Ireland are holding up accommodation, while others who are fleeing war and persecution are rendered homeless. The international protection system is also not working for the taxpayer, who is picking up the tab for an ever-increasing bill for accommodation, while those providing the accommodation are making fortunes. IPAS alone is projected to cost €1.2 billion this year, with virtually no transparency and zero accountability. So how and why has this been allowed to get to this point? Is it just part of wider failures that we've come to expect from Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael governments? Is it just government incompetence? Because the system is working for some people. It's working for those who have become millionaires on the back of the provision of IPAS accommodation, a scandal that I believe we've only barely scratched the surface of. For months I've been calling for a full review of all IPAS contracts granted, and the Minister has refused. It's also working for those companies who gain access to often low-paid, non-unionised, vulnerable workers, companies that wouldn't be eligible to get work permits. The system fails the applicants, it fails communities, it fails the taxpayer, but it is benefiting a brand new golden circle. How very Fianna Fáil. So Sinn Féin is clear that we have to have a managed immigration policy, one that recognises the value of those who come here, but also recognises the challenges in capacity in housing and public services and the ability to integrate. On international protection, it's clear that we need a rules-based system where applications are processed in a timely manner, where those found to have a genuine need for international protection are supported to integrate, and where those who are not entitled to be here leave or are deported. Can Corla, it's in everyone's interest that the state manages immigration properly. That means in relation to international protection, it means in relation to work permits and economic migration, it means in relation to those entering the state as tourists and as students, it means ensuring that the very small minority who abuse an Irish welcome by becoming involved in criminality are quickly deported. All of that is a basic necessity of proper governance, but instead we've had a litany of government failures. And those failures were crystallised for many by the horrendous recent events at City West. It would be a huge mistake for this House to ignore the widespread public anger about what happened to the young girl in this instance. Those who engaged in the violent disorder afterwards, entrapping people in their home and attacking Gardaí, must be condemned. But that shouldn't allow us to disregard the genuine fury over what happened. Because what happened was the result of catastrophic failures by the state, both in terms of keeping a vulnerable child safe and ensuring somebody not entitled to be here had left the state. The question hanging over Tusla remains unanswered. How does a 10-year-old girl go missing and the public not be informed? How the hell does Tusla get away with issuing a statement that essentially blamed the child for Tusla's failure, talking about absconding as if describing a violent criminal? And how is this just the latest of a series of Tusla failures, and yet government won't acknowledge that there's a systemic problem in that body? And an equally valid question is, how does someone enter the international protection system, remain in it for 6 years, receive a deportation order, and yet remain in this state to be charged with such a heinous crime? Above all, the question that people want answered is, can the government give an assurance that this won't happen again? And here, Minister, is the problem with deportation orders. Government aren't enforcing them, and more than anything, that has led to the undermining of people's confidence in the IPAS system. Yes, more deportation orders have been signed, but today the Minister does not know whether the vast majority of subject to deportations have left or remain in the state. In 2024, for example, there were 2,403 deportation orders, but only 156 confirmed deportation. That's 6.5%. And while there's been a number of high-profile deportation flights, there's no evidence about the wider enforcement in the system has improved. Across the international protection system, we know that changes need to be made in ensuring decisions are made quickly, in ensuring that decisions including deportation orders are enforced, in bringing the obscene profiteering to an end. Sinn Féin have set them out time and time again. Instead of Simon Harris, Micheál Martin or even Minister O'Callaghan speaking as if they were passing commentators, we need you to make the changes that we've outlined for once and for all.